Welcome to Mind the Gap. We talk a lot about aging, we talk about retirement, we talk about pensions, planning and slowing down. But what if retirement age was never about biology in the first place? What if it were an administrative decision that quietly became a cultural label? In this episode, Michael reflects on a moment in a bank, the subtle shift that happens when systems move faster than people, the curious disappearance of nuance after 65 plus, and why the people now in their 70s once danced to the Rolling Stones. It's a thoughtful look at the age gap between how we are categorized and how we actually experience ourselves. Here's Michael.
I'm beginning to notice a pattern that some of the best ideas for the week's podcast happen while I'm on my weekly visit to the bank to make a lodgement. It was mid-morning, quiet enough, the sort of hours where the place feels like a waiting room for something larger than just dropping a few bob into the bank. At the counter ahead of me was a couple, maybe 10 years older than I am. The staff member was leaning forward slightly, voice softened, tone patient. It's very straightforward once you get used to it. You'll find it much easier next time. They nodded, smiled politely, but they didn't look reassured. They actually looked displaced. Not confused, not incapable, displaced. And I got myself thinking, you know what, they look old. But then something else landed. I'm at what we might call retirement age soon, and I don't feel old. If I'm honest, I feel about 50. Curious, restless, in a good way, and still planning the next book, the next series, the next idea. I'm learning new systems, experimenting with platforms that didn't exist a few years ago. Nothing inside me has retired. So what exactly is retirement age? And who decided that crossing that line meant something about your capacity? Retirement age is not a biological event. It's a policy decision. In the late 19th century, Otto von Bismarck introduced one of the first state pension systems in Germany. The qualifying age was set at 70, at a time when average life expectancy was significantly lower. The policy was designed as a safety net near the end of life, not a second chapter filled with reinvention. Over time, 65 became the administrative norm in many countries. It was tidy, predictable, economically convenient. But tidy numbers have a way of becoming cultural truths. A pension threshold became a psychological label. And now we live inside that label. There's often an age gap between how the system measures us and how we experience it ourselves. Internally, nothing has retired. The curiosity hasn't retired, true appetite to build hasn't retired, and the sense of future hasn't stopped. Yet socially, something shifts. You notice it in small ways. You fill in an online form and the drop-down menu stops at 65 plus. No nuance, just a quiet digital filing cabinet. You fall out of marketing categories. You're no longer segmented by aspiration or lifestyle. You're bundled. Advertising tone changes. Fewer adventure holidays. More stair lifts. The algorithm adjusts before you do. And it's subtle. No one announces it, but you feel it. I remember the first time I filled in one of those forms and noticed the options. Under 25, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, and 65 plus. That's it. As if life becomes a single category after that, and if nuance retires too. And that's where the age gap becomes visible. There is chronological age, and then there is lived age. Psychologists talk about subjective age. Most people beyond retirement age report feeling 10 to 15 years younger than the number suggests. Identity stabilizes. Curiosity doesn't evaporate on cue. You don't wake up thinking, I am my demographic. You wake up thinking, what's next? And here's something we conveniently forget. You know, the people now in their 70s danced to the Rolling Stones. They queued for David Bowie records. They watched the Beatles reinvent culture. They were youth culture. They were disruption. We speak about old people as if they were born sensible and cardiganed, as if they emerged fully formed into caution. But the 75-year-old being gently coached through a nap may once have stood in a field in 1972 singing "You Can't Always Get What You Want" at the top of their lungs. That matters. Because old is not an identity that arrives. It's an identity that gets imposed. Think of the Werther's original adverts from the late 1980s and 1990s. The soft-voiced grandfather passing a caramel to his grandson. It was beautifully done, warm, nostalgic, and intimate, but powerful. Those adverts cemented the idea that Werther's were grandparent sweets. The campaign was so effective that it boxed the brand into an age stereotype. Eventually, the company withdrew the grandfather figure to appeal to younger consumers. The ads stopped. The idea did not. To this day, mention Werther's and many people still picture an elderly man offering a caramel from his pocket. Marketing created the trope, then tried to move beyond it. But the cultural imprint lingered. And I wonder if retirement age works the same way. A policymaker becomes a narrative. The narrative becomes a lens, and the lens becomes expectation. In that bank the other day, the couple weren't struggling with intelligence. They were navigating a system that has quietly moved its centre of gravity. Digital first, counter second. Efficiency over familiarity. They weren't incapable. They were being repositioned. Old, then, is relational. Old is the moment someone assumes that you're behind. And here's the part I wasn't expecting to admit. When I first mentioned my age recently, I felt a flicker, a small instinct to soften it, to manage how it might land. That interested me. Why would someone comfortable in his skin feel the need to manage a number? Because retirement age carries subtext. It can suggest winding down, slowing up, making way. And when I imagine being well beyond retirement age, I don't feel anxiety. I feel celebration. And that tells me something important. I'm not trying to escape aging. I'm trying to avoid shrinking. The dangerous age gap is not between 50 and retirement age. It's between vitality and resignation. I've met people in their 30s who've mentally retired, who've closed down curiosity, who've outsourced ambition. And I've met people in their 70s who are electric, fully engaged, mischievous in the best possible way. So what defines old? Not a pension threshold, not a drop-down menu, not a grandfather in a cardigan. Old may be the moment the future stops being accessible. And I'm not prepared to let a 19th century policy decision or a lingering advertising trope decide whether my future is accessible. The people in that bank may have danced harder than I ever did. We don't mind aging. We mind being dismissed. There will always be an age gap between how society categorises us and how we experience it ourselves. The question is whether we experience that gap as an exclusion or expansion. For me, it feels like expansion, and it feels worth celebrating. Mind the gap, especially the age gap. And that's this week's Mind the Gap. If today's reflection on the age gap resonated with you, there are more conversations waiting. Since season 1, we've explored everything from the fear of being ordinary, to righteous anger, to delegation and dignity, to the quiet courage required when life pauses without our permission. We've examined mistakes and what's happened afterwards, the danger of certainty, the pressure to conform, and the subtle ways we shrink without noticing. Season 2 shifted the lens more explicitly towards emotional intelligence. We looked at how emotions weren't instructions, how empathy can become overload, and how the stories we tell ourselves quietly shape our leadership and our lives. If you're new to the podcast, you might enjoy starting with episodes on Season 1 on responsibility and resilience, or the conversation on rumour, shame and innuendo, or perhaps the reflection on living with fewer filters. And if you prefer your reflections in print, the ideas behind this podcast have grown into 3 books: Mind the Gap, The Next Station Is, and Between the Lines. They expand on those themes of identity, leadership, communication, and the subtle spaces in between, where meaning is often found. All are available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle editions and on audible.com. If you found value here, consider please sharing the episode, leaving a review or recommending it to someone who might need it. Until next time, keep thinking and keep questioning.